Okay, let's unpack this. Repetition. Just sit with that word for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
From the near imperceptible wobble of an atom to, the majestic sweep of galaxies forming spirals again and again, things keep happening again.
Yeah.
Our hearts beat in a steady rhythm. Seasons cycle through their familiar dance. And history, well, it often feels like it's rhyming, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's easy to take this constant return for granted, but what if this fundamental aspect of reality, this inherent tendency towards recurrence, is actually a hidden key unlocking a deeper understanding of, well, just about everything?
It's truly compelling how that seemingly simple observation resonates across such a vast range of disciplines. The material you shared offers a fascinating look at repetition through the lens of everything from the most fundamental laws of physics to the intricate workings of the human mind and the patterns of our societies.
Right.
Our goal in this deep dive is really to extract the most profound insights about this universal phenomenon and explore why it strikes such a chord in our ongoing quest for knowledge.
Exactly. So when we say repetition, what's the core idea? It's the act of doing, saying, seeing, or experiencing something again. Pretty basic.
Seems simple on the surface, yeah.
But then you start to peel back the layers, and you find all these related concepts, each with its own subtle but important distinction.
Absolutely. It's helpful to draw some lines, maybe, between these related ideas. In science, for instance, we talk about replication.
Okay.
This isn't just doing something again. It's the rigorous, controlled repetition of experiments specifically designed to verify initial findings, minimize errors, and ultimately build a body of reliable scientific knowledge.
It's very deliberate.
Very. The emphasis here is on the systematic approach, ensuring that the conditions are as identical as possible each time to guarantee the trustworthiness of the results. It's about building that solid foundation of evidence.
Right, like a chef meticulously following the same recipe multiple times to ensure it works every time. Got it. Then there's recurrence.
Yeah.
How's it different?
Recurrence is more about the reappearance of an event, action, state, or phenomenon over time. It often carries the implication of a cycle, though not always a perfectly predictable one. Think about historical events. We often see similar patterns or themes recurring throughout history, right? Even if the specific details differ.
Yeah, okay.
Or consider natural phenomena like weather patterns. We see similar types of weather recurring year after year. It comes back around.
And that brings us to cycles, which feel even more structured and predictable than recurrence.
Precisely. Cycles are regular, often predictable sequences of events that unfold and then return to their initial state, allowing the sequence to begin again.
Like the seasons.
The changing seasons are a perfect example. They follow a consistent order and always return to where they started. Similarly, a biological life cycle, like that of a butterfly, moves through a predictable series of stages.
Or an engine.
Yeah. Even in the engineered world, think of the four-stroke cycle in an internal combustion engine, a repeating sequence that allows it to continuously generate power. And on a grander scale, we see repeating patterns in economic trends or the Earth's long-term geochemical processes.
Okay, so replication is about controlled verification. Recurrence is a return over time. Cycles are structured and predictable returns. And then we have patterns. What's the essence there?
Patterns are the discernible regularities we observe in the form, structure, sequence, or relationships within both natural and human-designed systems. They're everywhere you look.
Like snowflakes or galaxies.
Exactly. From the intricate symmetry of a snowflake to the spiraling arms of a galaxy, or even the consistent grammatical structure of a language. Recognizing these patterns is often the very first crucial step in any scientific investigation.
It's how we start to make sense of things.
Fundamentally, yes. And what's really interesting is that this ability to spot and analyze these repetitions, these patterns and cycles, is considered a fundamental cross-cutting concept in science education. It's a foundational way we organize and make sense of the complexity around us. It's like our brains are inherently wired to seek out what repeats, to find the underlying order.
It's like our brains are hardwired to look for the beat in the universe's song. That makes sense. And that leads us to this idea of looking at repetition through an AI lens. What unique perspective does that bring?
Well, when we consider how artificial intelligence operates by analyzing vast amounts of data, searching for underlying algorithms, and identifying patterns, it offers a powerful new way to uncover connections across seemingly disparate fields.
Connections we might otherwise miss.
Exactly. Connections that might elude us through more traditional, isolated approaches. AI can quantify the frequency of certain patterns, model the dynamics of complex cycles with incredible precision, and reveal how surprisingly simple, repetitive rules can give rise to incredibly complex behaviors across all kinds of systems.
Wow.
It's like having a superpowered pattern recognition machine helping us see the underlying unity in it all.
Okay, so with this framework in mind, let's plunge into how repetition manifests across the vast expanse of the universe, starting with the bedrock of it all.
The physical world. Physics, show us your repeating acts.
Right. The physical universe hums with a constant rhythm of regularity, driven by fundamental laws that dictate repetitive processes. Take oscillations, for example.
Okay, oscillation.
That's the back and forth periodic motion around a point of equilibrium. Think of a pendulum swinging in a predictable arc, or atoms within a molecule vibrating. These motions repeat with a specific period, a certain frequency, and they can often be beautifully described using smooth, repeating up and down curves known as sine waves.
Sine waves, right.
What's truly fundamental here is that these oscillations are governed by core physical principles like Newton's second law and the conservation of energy, where energy is constantly transforming between its potential and kinetic forms in a repeating exchange.
A constant give and take. Exactly. It's a constant give and take striving for balance.
So this constant back and forth is a form of repetition, almost like the universe breathing, driven by these fundamental laws seeking equilibrium.
Got it. And then we have waves. I always picture the ocean, but it's obviously a much broader concept, right?
Absolutely. Waves are essentially disturbances that propagate through space. And they also exhibit a repeating nature both in time and space. Light, sound, radio waves, they all have these repeating characteristics.
Like amplitude and frequency.
Amplitude, their height or intensity, frequency, how often they repeat, and wavelength, the distance between repetitions, Crucially, these waves are the fundamental way that energy and information travel across the universe. Their inherent periodicity allows for this orderly transfer.
And these oscillations and waves, they don't just occur randomly, do they? They're underlying rules that govern their behavior.
Exactly right. That's where conservation laws come into play.
These laws state that certain fundamental quantities within a closed system, things like total energy, momentum, and angular momentum, remain constant over time.
They don't change.
This invariance, this repetition of a quantity's value, places firm constraints on how systems can behave, often leading to the stable states and the repetitive motions we've been discussing. And what's quite profound is that even at the frontiers of our current understanding, like in string theory, the idea of elementary particles as different vibrational patterns of incredibly tiny strings suggests a form of repetition at the most fundamental building blocks of reality.
Wow.
Historically, too, the concept of atomism also relied on the repetitive interactions of basic, indivisible particles.
So this idea of repetition spans from the infinitesimally small to the unimaginably vast. Amazing. Now, let's shift our focus from these fundamental laws to some of the grander cycles we observe, such as those in thermodynamics and geochemistry. That sounds, well, maybe a bit dry.
Let's try to make it a bit more engaging. Thermodynamic cycles are essentially sequences of changes in a system's properties like pressure, volume, and temperature that eventually bring it back to its original state.
So they loop back.
Right. This cyclical nature is what allows devices like engines and refrigerators to operate continuously through a repeating series of steps. Think about a car engine going through its intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust phases. That's a thermodynamic cycle.
Okay, that makes sense.
The key is that the system returns to its starting point, enabling the process to repeat indefinitely and perform work or transfer heat consistently.
So it's a self-contained, repeating process that allows us to harness energy or move heat from one place to another. Makes sense in a practical way. And then geochemical cycles. That's all about the Earth on a massive scale, right?
Precisely. These are the enormous scale movements and transformations of chemical elements and compounds through the Earth's various reservoirs, the atmosphere, the oceans, the land, and the biosphere, all living things.
Like the water cycle.
The water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, these are all absolutely essential for regulating our planet's climate and supporting all life. They involve continuous repeating processes like evaporation, precipitation, decomposition, and photosynthesis, constantly shuffling these vital elements around.
It keeps everything going.
It does. What's really striking is how interconnected everything is through these cycles. The very air we breathe, the water we drink, the ground beneath our feet are all part of these grand repeating loops.
It's like the Earth itself has these giant repeating circulatory systems.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the astronomical cycles.
Yeah.
the ones that humans have looked to for guidance and timekeeping since, well, forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Earth's daily rotation on its axis, the moon's regular phases, the Earth's yearly orbit around the sun, these predictable, repeating celestial motions have been absolutely fundamental to human timekeeping and our earliest understanding of the cosmos for millennia.
Our first clocks and calendars.
They provided the very first frameworks for our calendars, our agricultural practices, and our fundamental sense of order within the universe.
Okay, the physical world definitely seems to operate on a principle of repetition. Now let's move into the realm of pure logic and abstract structure. Mathematics. Where does this idea of repetition reveal itself there?
Mathematics. It provides us with the abstract language and tools to describe and generate repetition in its most elegant and pure forms. Consider sequences. Ordered lists of numbers that follow a specific rule, often involving a form of repetition or a defined relationship between successive terms. Arithmetic sequences, where you add a constant value. Geometric sequences, where you multiply by a constant ratio. Even the renowned Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two preceding ones, they all demonstrate ordered repetition and the emergence of patterns from simple rules.
The Fibonacci sequence is incredible. It seems to pop up in the spiral patterns of sunflowers and seashells. It's almost uncanny how this simple rule generates patterns we see everywhere in nature.
It truly is, and it serves as a beautiful example of how straightforward, repetitive rules can lead to surprisingly complex and naturally occurring patterns. Then we have recursion.
Recursion.
Which is this fascinating and almost mind-bending concept of defining something in terms of itself.
Like those Russian nesting dolls, where you open one to find a smaller, identical version inside, and so on.
That's a perfect analogy. Recursion in mathematics and computer science involves a function or process calling itself, but with a slightly modified input each time until it reaches a specific base case where it stops.
So it calls itself again and again.
Right. This seemingly simple act of self-reference, repeated with variation, allows for the construction of incredibly intricate structures or the generation of infinite sequences from a very concise set of rules. It's repetition with a clever twist where each step builds upon the previous one.
So you start with something basic, and by repeatedly applying the same rule to its output, you can generate something incredibly complex. It feels almost like magic woven into the fabric of logic. And then there are algorithms, the step-by-step sets of instructions we use.
Many algorithms rely very heavily on the power of repetition, often employing loops.
Loops, right.
Repeating a block of code until a condition is met, or recursion to process large amounts of data, or iteratively work towards a solution. Think about an algorithm designed to search for a specific word within a vast digital document. It might repeatedly check each word in sequence until it finds a match. Repetition is absolutely fundamental to how computers process information and solve problems.
Okay, sequences, recursion, algorithms. All different flavors of structured repetition in the world of math. But now let's delve into something that consistently amazes me. Fractals. These geometric shapes are just, well, they seem to defy intuition.
Fractals are indeed remarkable. They are complex geometric shapes that exhibit a property called self-similarity.
Self-similar.
Meaning, if you were to zoom in on any arbitrary part of a fractal, you would observe patterns and structures that look strikingly similar to the whole. They are typically generated through a process of iteration.
Iteration, repeating something.
Exactly. Which involves the repeated application of a simple geometric rule or transformation on an initial shape.
So you begin with a basic form and just keep applying the same operation over and over again, and it evolves into this infinitely detailed, intricate entity.
Precisely. Consider the Koch snowflake, where you start with a simple equilateral triangle and repeatedly add smaller triangles to the middle of each of its sides, or the Sierpinski gasket, where you begin with a triangle and repeatedly remove smaller inverted triangles from its center. Even the breathtakingly complex Mandelbrot set and Julia sets.
Those are amazing images.
They are, generated by iteratively applying relatively simple mathematical functions to complex numbers, reveal these stunningly intricate and infinitely detailed boundaries.
And you find these in nature too.
What's even more astonishing is that we find fractal-like patterns pervading the natural world in the branching of trees, the meandering paths of rivers, the ruggedness of coastlines, and even within the intricate structure of our own lungs.
Wow.
It's as if nature has discovered the power of these repeated mathematical rules to build all sorts of diverse and complex forms.
It's like nature is speaking in the language of mathematics, using these repetitive rules as its vocabulary to construct the world around it.
Exactly. And fractals possess some key characteristics that set them apart. Beyond self-similarity, they exhibit intricate detail at all scales. No matter how closely you look, you'll find more detail.
Infinite detail.
Seems like it. And often they possess a non-integer fractal dimension. This isn't your standard 1, 2, or 3 dimensions. It's a way of quantifying how densely the fractal fills space.
How much space it takes up. Sort of.
Kind of. For example, the Sierpinski gasket has a fractal dimension of approximately 1.585, which tells us it's more than a line, dimension 1, because of all its twists and turns, but it doesn't completely fill a 2-dimensional area. What fractals truly highlight is how immense complexity and profound beauty can arise from the relentless repetition of surprisingly simple fundamental rules, offering us a glimpse into the underlying generative processes at play in the natural world.
It's utterly mind-boggling. Simple repetition leading to what feels like infinite complexity. Now, let's transition from the abstract world of mathematics to the very tangible and dynamic world of biology. How does this theme of repetition manifest in living organisms?
Life itself is fundamentally built upon principles of repetition, starting at the most basic molecular level. Think about DNA replication.
Copying DNA.
Right, the essential process by which cells create identical copies of their deoxyribonucleic acid, the molecule that carries our genetic instructions. This process ensures the faithful transmission of hereditary information from one generation of cells to the next.
But it has to be accurate.
Extremely. While occasional errors, mutations can introduce vital variation, the core mechanism is one of remarkably high-fidelity repetition of the genetic code. And the DNA molecule itself is constructed from repeating units called nucleotides.
So the very blueprint of life is copied and passed down through a highly accurate, repetitive process. That makes perfect sense for ensuring heredity. What about at the level of individual cells?
The cell cycle is a fundamental repeating unit for life.
The cell cycle.
It's the carefully orchestrated sequence of growth, DNA replication, and cell division that cells undergo to create new cells. This repeating cycle is absolutely essential for the development, growth, repair, and reproduction of all living organisms, from the simplest single-celled microbes to us.
It's like life is in a constant state of renewal and propagation through this repeating cellular dance. And then we have circadian rhythms, our internal biological clocks that govern so much of our daily lives.
Exactly. The vast majority of living organisms, from tiny bacteria to humans, possess these approximately 24-hour biological clocks.
Our body clocks.
Yeah, and they regulate an astonishing array of physiological and behavioral processes. Our sleep-wake cycles, the release of hormones, our metabolic activity, and even the timing of DNA replication in some organisms.
They run everything.
Pretty much. These rhythms are primarily synchronized with the daily cycle of light and darkness, but they are intrinsically internal and will continue to cycle even under constant environmental conditions. They allow organisms to anticipate and prepare for the predictable daily changes in their environment, optimizing their biological functions throughout the day.
And messing them up is bad.
It can be, yeah. For instance, some fascinating research suggests that disruptions to these vital rhythms can even interfere with the accurate replication of DNA.
Wow. So even our daily routines and well-being are deeply connected to these internal repeating biological cycles. What about at the level of entire organisms and within the intricate web of ecosystems?
Individual organisms go through life cycles, which are repeating sequences of developmental stages from birth or hatching to reproduction and eventually death. Beyond the daily circadian rhythms, there are other biological rhythms that operate on different timescales, shorter, more frequent rhythms like hormone pulses, and longer, less frequent rhythms like seasonal breeding patterns or migrations.
Tied to the environment.
Often synchronized with broader environmental cycles such as tides or lunar phases. Then, when we look at the level of ecosystems, we observe ecological cycles, such as the fluctuating populations of predators and prey that exhibit repeating patterns over time.
The classic predator-prey cycle.
Exactly. Or the continuous cycling of essential nutrients through the environment, ensuring the sustainability of the entire system.
It's all interconnected, a complex symphony of cycles within cycles operating at different scales.
Yeah.
And then there's this concept of evolutionary echoes. That sounds really intriguing, like history leaving its mark on the present.
Convergent evolution is a truly fascinating phenomenon.
Convergent.
Where completely unrelated species facing similar environmental pressures or ecological niches independently evolve remarkably similar traits.
Like finding the same solution separately.
Exactly. Think of the streamlined body shape that has evolved in sharks, fish, dolphins, mammals, and the extinct ichthyosaurs, reptiles,
Hmm.
they all arrived at this hydrodynamic form as an optimal solution for efficient swimming in the water, a repeated evolutionary answer to a common challenge.
Okay.
We see this repeated problem solving in the evolution of wings for flight in birds, bats, and insects, or the development of complex, camera-like eyes in various animal groups. It's as if evolution keeps rediscovering the same successful designs.
A form of repetition in outcomes.
Right. There's also parallel evolution, where closely related species independently evolve similar traits, often starting from a similar ancestral condition. And if you look at the fundamental body plans of many organisms, you often see that they are constructed from repeating modular units.
Like vertebrae.
Like the vertebrae in our spines or the segments in an insect's body, yeah. With the development of these repeating structures often controlled by repeating sets of regulatory genes, like the Hox genes.
It's like evolution has a preferred toolkit of repeated solutions and developmental patterns that it draws upon when faced with similar challenges or building similar structures. Absolutely amazing. Now, let's bring this back to our own species, human systems. How does this principle of repetition shape our minds, our cultures, in the course of our history?
Right, back to us. In the realm of psychology, repetition is absolutely fundamental to the processes of learning and memory.
Practice makes perfect.
Well, repeated exposure to new information or consistent practice of a skill strengthens the synaptic connections in our brains, making it progressively easier to remember and recall that information or perform that skill. Learning techniques like spaced repetition specifically leverage this principle to enhance long-term retention. Even the formation of our long-term memories, both for specific events and for general knowledge, relies heavily on this process of reinforcement through repeated neural activity.
And the hippocampus is involved.
Yes, a crucial brain region called the hippocampus plays a key role in detecting repeated patterns and consolidating these experiences into lasting memories.
So if you want something to stick, repeating it is key. It's not just rote learning. It's about building those lasting neural pathways. What about habit formation? We all have those ingrained behaviors, some helpful, some less so.
Habits are essentially learned behaviors that become automatic responses to specific cues or contexts because we have consistently repeated them in those situations.
They become automatic.
Exactly. This repetition strengthens the neural associations between the cue and the behavior, so eventually the action becomes almost reflexive, requiring minimal conscious thought. Habits can be incredibly efficient, freeing up our mental resources.
But hard to break.
But as we all know from personal experience, breaking ingrained habits that have been reinforced through years of repetition can be a significant challenge.
Tell me about it. And then we have routines, which feel a bit more intentional and structured than our automatic habits.
That's a good distinction. Routines are consciously structured sequences of actions that we follow on a regular basis, providing a sense of predictability and order to our daily lives.
They give us structure.
Right. While they often incorporate elements of habit, routines are generally more deliberately designed and goal-directed. They offer significant benefits for our mental and physical well-being, contributing to reduced stress levels and improvements in areas like sleep quality and healthy behaviors.
Especially for kids.
For children in particular, consistent routines can create a vital sense of safety, security, and predictability in their environment.
That sense of structure really does help us feel more in control. Makes perfect sense. And then there's pattern recognition, which feels like such a fundamental aspect of how we navigate and make sense of the world around us.
It absolutely is. Our brains are constantly and automatically scanning the sensory information we receive, actively searching for familiar patterns, and comparing them to patterns we have stored in our memory from past experiences.
We're pattern-seeking machines.
Pretty much. This incredible ability allows us to understand spoken and written language, recognize faces, identify objects in our environment, and even anticipate what might happen next based on recurring sequences of events. Repetition plays a crucial role in building these internal representations of patterns.
You've seen go along.
However, this very drive to find patterns can sometimes lead us astray, causing us to perceive patterns even when they don't actually exist, leading to what we call apophenia.
Like seeing familiar shapes in abstract art or constellations in the night sky.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples of apophenia, finding meaningful patterns in random or meaningless data. Now, let's broaden our scope beyond the individual to consider history and culture. Does the principle of repetition play a significant role in shaping these larger human systems? History often appears to exhibit cyclical patterns. We see the rise and fall of empires, recurring cycles of economic boom and bust, and even shifts in political ideologies that seem to echo previous eras. While history never repeats itself in exact detail, similar underlying dynamics in human behaviors can indeed lead to recurring trajectories and challenges.
They can come back around.
They do. Then we have traditions, which are the beliefs and practices that are passed down through generations within a culture, inherently involving repetition. They provide a crucial sense of identity, cultural continuity, social stability, and a vital connection to the past.
Like cultural DNA.
In a way, yeah. Even physical structures, like architectural styles, can be repeated over time to preserve cultural memory or assert a particular cultural identity. However, traditions can also become resistant to change and may not always adapt effectively to new circumstances.
So traditions act as a kind of cultural anchor, using repetition to maintain continuity and identity. What about rituals? How they fit in?
Rituals are structured sequences of actions that are performed repeatedly, often with deep symbolic meaning. We find them in religious ceremonies, social gatherings, and even within organizations.
Why do we do them?
Their very repetition serves to reinforce group identity, transmit core values and beliefs, and provide a sense of stability and predictability, particularly during times of uncertainty or transition. The power of rituals often stems from their consistent performance and the shared experience of the repeated actions, strengthening social bonds and collective understanding.
It's like these repeated actions create a shared experience and reinforce a sense of belonging. And finally, let's consider language itself. How does repetition play a fundamental role in how we communicate?
Language is fundamentally built upon repetition at multiple levels. We repeat basic sounds, phonemes, to form words. We repeat words according to grammatical rules to construct sentences. We frequently reuse common sentence structures and idiomatic phrases, and even our everyday conversations are filled with predictable routines and conversational turns.
We repeat phrases all the time.
Exactly. The art of rhetoric even utilizes repetition as a powerful persuasive tool. And the very process of learning a new language relies heavily on repeated exposure to vocabulary and grammatical structures, as well as repeated practice in speaking and writing. This underlying framework of repetition is what makes language both learnable and understandable.
It's truly remarkable to see how this one core idea of repetition weeds its way through virtually every aspect of our existence, from the smallest particles to the largest social structures. So given its pervasiveness, what are the fundamental functions that repetition serves? Why is it such a universal principle?
It's a great question. Its widespread presence suggests that it fulfills some truly fundamental roles in the universe. One of the most crucial is providing stability, predictability, and order.
The bedrock.
Right. The consistent nature of physical laws and the principles of conservation ensure a certain level of predictable behavior in the universe. Natural cycles, from the rotation of the Earth to the changing seasons, provide us with reliable rhythms.
Things we can count on.
In our own lives, routines create structure and reduce uncertainty. Traditions and rituals offer social cohesion and stability. Even the scientific method itself relies on the fundamental assumption that the natural world is ordered, and that we can uncover that order through repeated observations and experiments. Patterns are the discernible regularities that emerge from this underlying repetition, allowing us to categorize and understand the world around us.
So repetition is the scaffolding.
It's like repetition is the very scaffolding upon which a reliable and understandable universe is built.
It's like repetition is the steady drumbeat that underlies the universe's unfolding symphony. What other essential functions does it serve?
Repetition is also absolutely key to efficiency, optimization, and the mastery of skills.
Getting good at stuff.
Exactly. Our internal circadian rhythms optimize our biological functions by timing them in a predictable, repeating manner throughout the day. Habits automate many of our routine tasks, freeing up valuable mental resources for more complex endeavors. Engineered systems, such as internal combustion engines, rely on repeating thermodynamic cycles for efficient energy conversion. Even in the natural world, patterns like the hexagonal structure of a honeycomb often reflect an optimized solution achieved through the repetition of a basic geometric form.
Nature finds efficient patterns.
It seems to. And of course, the process of practice, the repeated execution of an action, is how we learn and master any skill, ultimately leading to automaticity and a level of expertise that feels like muscle memory.
Practice really does make, if not perfect, at least significantly better. It's all about those repeated actions building expertise. What about the way we learn and retain information?
As we touched on earlier, repetition is fundamental to the processes of learning, memory formation, and the effective transmission of information.
How we pass things on.
Yes. Actively repeating new information strengthens the crucial neural connections in our brains, facilitating the transfer of that information from short-term working memory to more robust long-term storage. It's absolutely essential for language acquisition, both in childhood and adulthood, and for mastering new concepts and skills.
And for culture.
Even the reliable transmission of genetic information across generations depends on the accurate repetition of DNA sequences. And the preservation and sharing of cultural knowledge relies heavily on the repeated nature of traditions, storytelling, and language itself. In the scientific community, replication of findings is paramount for the reliable transmission of knowledge and the validation of new discoveries.
So it's not just about memorizing facts. It's about building those lasting cognitive connections and ensuring the reliable flow of information across time and generations. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. How can something that seems so inherently focused on sameness actually be a driving force behind novelty and the emergence of complexity in the universe?
That's a seemingly paradoxical but absolutely crucial aspect of repetition. Pattern formation and the emergence of complexity are often driven by the repeated application of surprisingly simple rules.
Like the fractals again.
Think back to the intricate beauty of fractals, incredibly complex and detailed images generated by the repeated application of a basic geometric transformation. This principle extends to the biological realm, where repeating activator-inhibitor mechanisms at the cellular level can give rise to complex patterns like the stripes on a zebra or the spots on a leopard.
Wow.
More broadly, repetitive interactions at a microscopic level can lead to fascinating instances of self-organization and emergent behaviors at a macroscopic level.
Quite.
Consider the formation of sand dunes from the repeated action of wind on individual grains of sand, the synchronized flashing of fireflies in a large group, or even the emergence of complex market trends from the repeated individual economic decisions of countless people.
Small repeats, big effects.
Exactly. And crucially, when there is a degree of variation introduced within the repetition,
Though it changes.
like occasional errors during DNA replication or subtle modifications in the transmission of cultural practices, that's where true novelty and the process of evolution arise. Biological evolution, at its core, is a process of repetition, inheritance of traits, with variation through mutation and subsequent selection based on environmental pressures.
So it's not just the exact same thing happening over and over. There's often a little bit of noise or variation within the repetition, and that's where the seeds of newness are sown. It's a dynamic interplay between the predictable and the unexpected. Now, considering all these diverse manifestations of repetition, how do we actually evaluate its overall impact? Is it a force for good, a potential source of stagnation, or a complex mixture of both?
It's definitely a multifaceted phenomenon with both potential benefits and drawbacks. Let's consider evolution and reproduction again. The high fidelity of DNA replication is clearly essential for genetic stability and the transmission of successful traits.
That's good.
But a complete lack of variation would be detrimental in changing environments, limiting a species' ability to adapt. So there's an inherent trade-off between the benefits of stability and the necessity of flexibility for long-term survival.
Right.
What has worked repeatedly in the past might not be effective in the face of new challenges.
So sometimes breaking the established patterns is crucial for progress and adaptation. What about for us as individuals and within our communities? How does it balance out there?
For individuals, as we've discussed, establishing healthy routines and habits can be incredibly beneficial, providing structure, reducing stress, and improving efficiency. Repetition in learning is essential for skill development and memory consolidation. Shared rituals can strengthen social bonds and provide a sense of belonging.
Those are the positives.
Definitely. However, excessive or unexamined repetition can also lead to monotony, boredom, and a stifling of creativity. We can become stuck in rigid patterns of behavior and even reinforce harmful habits through repetition. Furthermore, our reliance on pattern recognition can sometimes make us vulnerable to cognitive biases. For communities and cultures, traditions play a vital role in preserving cultural identity and transmitting valuable knowledge across generations.
Also good.
But they can also become obstacles to progress and the adoption of new ideas if they are too resistant to change. Similarly, historical cycles can unfortunately repeat negative patterns if we fail to learn from the past and actively work to break those cycles.
So it cuts both ways.
Very much so. The impact of repetition is highly context dependent, and often it's about finding a healthy equilibrium between the comfort and stability of the familiar and the need for innovation and adaptation.
It sounds like it's a constant balancing act, navigating between the security of established patterns and the necessity of embracing novelty. Now let's delve into some of the more philosophical aspects of repetition. How does this concept intersect with our understanding of time itself?
That's a truly profound question. Throughout history, different cultures have held fundamentally different views on the nature of time.
Like cyclical versus linear.
Exactly. Many ancient and non-Western cultures embraced a cyclical view of time, drawing parallels with the repeating patterns they observed in nature, the changing seasons, the cycles of the moon, the movements of celestial bodies. This perspective often emphasizes renewal, balance, and the interconnectedness of events. This contrasts with the more linear view of time that became dominant in Western thought, particularly with the rise of Abrahamic religions and modern scientific progress, which tends to emphasize a forward progression of events, development, and a clear beginning and end.
Different worldviews.
These differing views on the fundamental nature of time deeply influence cultural values, societal structures, and individual perspectives on life and death.
Cyclical versus linear time.
Yeah.
Those are such fundamentally different ways of perceiving our existence and our place in the cosmos. What about this concept of eternal return or recurrence? That sounds quite thought-provoking, almost like a cosmic loop.
It is a deeply thought-provoking idea, famously associated with the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. In essence, the concept of eternal return suggests the possibility that time is not linear, but cyclical, and that all events in the universe will repeat themselves infinitely over an infinite amount of time.
Everything happens again.
That's the idea. Nietzsche presented this not necessarily as a literal cosmological prediction, but more as a powerful thought experiment, a profound challenge to truly affirm and love one's life in its entirety.
Amor fati.
Exactly, amor fati. To live in such a way that you would willingly choose to relive every moment of it exactly as it was over and over again.
Wow, that's intense.
While Nietzsche may have briefly considered its cosmological plausibility, it is generally interpreted as a potent ethical and existential challenge, a call to live a life of such value and meaning that its infinite repetition would be a source of joy and affirmation rather than dread.
So less physics, more philosophy.
Pretty much. Modern physics, with its current understanding of the universe's continued expansion, has largely moved away from cyclical models of the cosmos.
So perhaps not a literal cosmic replay button, but more of a powerful lens through which to examine how we are living our lives and the choices we make. And then, of course, the groundbreaking work of Einstein with his theories of relativity completely reshaped our classical notions of time, right?
Absolutely. Both special and general relativity revolutionized our understanding of time, demonstrating that it is not an absolute and universal constant, but rather is relative to the observer's state of motion and the strength of the gravitational field.
Time isn't fixed.
Right. The phenomena of time dilation, where time passes differently for observers in different gravitational fields or moving at different speeds, fundamentally complicate any simple notion of either linear progression or perfectly cyclical repetition. Relativity revealed that time is far more interwoven with space and matter than we had previously imagined.
Okay, so even the very fabric of time isn't as straightforwardly repetitive as we might intuitively think. What about the age-old philosophical debate between determinism and free will? How does the concept of a potentially repetitive universe intersect with that enduring question?
The big one. The philosophical concept of determinism posits that every event, including our thoughts and actions, is causally necessitated by prior events and the immutable laws of nature.
Everything is predetermined.
That's the idea. This implies that if the initial conditions of the universe were to repeat exactly, then everything that followed would also repeat in precisely the same way. This raises a fundamental challenge to our intuitive sense of free will.
Yeah.
If all our choices are predetermined by prior causes, how can we truly be said to have the freedom to choose otherwise?
Where's the choice?
Philosophers who believe that free will and determinism are incompatible are known as incompatibilists, leading to positions like hard determinism. Determinism is true, so no free will. And libertarianism, we have free will, so determinism must be false. Conversely, compatibilists argue that free will and determinism can coexist, often by redefining free will in terms of acting according to our own desires and intentions without external coercion, even if those desires and intentions are ultimately the result of deterministic processes. So, the idea of a perfectly repetitive, deterministic universe certainly presents a significant challenge to our common understanding of free agency.
It's a real head-scratcher that philosophers have grappled with for centuries. Now, we touched on the concept of tradition earlier. What is the broader philosophical perspective on the tension between tradition and progress?
In many narratives of progress, tradition is often viewed somewhat negatively as a force that can hold us back from innovation and improvement.
Old versus new.
Right. However, philosophy also recognizes the crucial role that tradition plays in providing social stability, preserving cultural identity, and transmitting accumulated wisdom and knowledge across generations. It's important to recognize that tradition isn't necessarily static and unchanging repetition.
It can evolve.
It can. It can also be a dynamic process involving reinterpretation, adaptation, and what some scholars call repetition with variation or tradition creativity. The ongoing tension between the impulse to preserve the valuable aspects of the past and the drive to embrace the potential of the future is a constant and fundamental balancing act in the evolution of cultures and societies.
It's like we're constantly in dialogue with the echoes of the past, trying to decide what to carry forward and what to leave behind. Let's shift to a more personal level again and consider consciousness and our subjective experience of repetition. How does our minds perceive and react to things that repeat?
Our perception of time itself can be influenced by repetition. Repeated stimuli are often perceived as lasting for a shorter duration than novel stimuli, a phenomenon known as repetition compression.
Things feel shorter if repeated.
Often, yeah. This might be due to our brains processing familiar information more efficiently, requiring fewer cognitive resources. However, our expectations can also play a role. If we anticipate a repetition, it might feel even shorter.
Interesting. And boredom.
Then there's the interplay between attention and boredom. Excessive and monotonous repetition often leads to boredom, a state characterized by a lack of interest and a tendency for our minds to wander.
Zoning out.
Right. Neuroscientific research suggests that boredom is associated with reduced activity in areas of the brain involved in executive control and increased activity in the default mode network, which is often active during mind wandering. Boredom can be seen as a signal from our brains indicating a need for a change in activity or stimulation.
A signal to do something else.
Pretty much. Our ability to recognize patterns, which is honed through repeated exposure and experience, profoundly shapes how we understand and interact with reality. Even our subjective inner lives are characterized by recurring thoughts, emotions, and memories. And our sense of self is, in part, built upon the continuity provided by memories formed through repeated experiences and reflections.
So our internal landscape is also shaped by these cycles of perception, attention, and memory. And then there's this illusory truth effect I've heard about that sounds a bit concerning in our current information age.
It is indeed. The illusory truth effect is a cognitive bias, where repeated exposure to a statement, even if it is initially recognized as false, can increase our belief in its truthfulness over time.
Just hearing it makes it seem true.
Essentially, yes. This seems to occur because the repeated exposure makes a statement feel more familiar, and this feeling of familiarity is subconsciously misattributed to the statement being accurate. Our brains tend to process familiar information more fluently, and we mistakenly interpret this ease of processing as an indication of truth.
Oh, wow.
This effect has significant implications for various areas, including advertising, political messaging, and the spread of misinformation, as repeated exposure, even to falsehoods, can subtly erode our ability to discern fact from fiction.
That's a powerful and somewhat unsettling reminder of how repetition can subtly manipulate our beliefs. And finally, what are some of the ethical considerations surrounding habit formation and the cognitive biases that can be reinforced through repetition?
Because habits can become so deeply ingrained and automatic, it raises important ethical questions about our responsibility for our habitual actions, particularly if those actions have negative consequences for ourselves or others.
Are we responsible for our habits?
It's a complex question. Repetition can also strongly reinforce existing cognitive biases, leading to potentially unfair judgments, discriminatory behaviors, and poor decision-making. We have an ethical responsibility to cultivate self-awareness regarding our own biases and to actively work to counteract them, even when those biases feel natural due to repeated reinforcement.
We need to be aware.
Yes. Breaking deeply entrenched chains of habit, especially harmful ones, can be incredibly challenging, and there are significant ethical concerns surrounding the ways in which repetition and persuasive technologies can be intentionally exploited for commercial or political gain, often without our conscious awareness.
Like targeted ads using this.
Exactly. It underscores the crucial need to find a balance between the efficiency and automaticity that repetition can provide, and the imperative for conscious, ethical action and critical reflection.
It's certainly a lot to consider. Now, as we begin to draw our deep dive to a close, let's try to synthesize some of these ideas. What is the overarching significance of repetition? Why is it such a pervasive organizing principle in the universe?
Well, when you weave together all the threads we've explored across these diverse fields, you begin to see some remarkable commonalities. The prevalence of cycles, waves, recursion, feedback loops, and underlying mathematical patterns.
Same themes keep coming up.
They do. There's a clear and profound interplay between different levels of repetition, from the fundamental physical cycles that can entrain biological rhythms to how those rhythms can influence our psychology and behavior, ultimately shaping our social interactions and cultural norms.
It connects everything.
Systems across all scales demonstrate a tendency to adapt and synchronize with predictable repetitions in their environment. However, it's equally important to note that disruptions to these expected repetitions can often lead to instability and significant change.
Breaking the pattern matters too.
Absolutely. And while repetition provides a crucial foundation for order and stability, true novelty and innovation often emerge at the points where established repetitions break down, incorporate variation, or are combined in new and unexpected ways.
Like those DNA errors.
Think of errors in DNA replication that drive evolution, individuals breaking from established routines to foster creativity, or unexpected historical events that disrupt long-standing societal cycles.
So it's this constant tension and interplay between the forces of stability and the seeds of change.
Exactly. Repetition appears to function as a fundamental organizing principle throughout reality, playing this fascinating dual role. It provides the very foundation for order, predictability, and the reliable functioning of countless systems, but it also serves as a crucial engine for complexity, adaptation, and the emergence of novelty when combined with the inevitable introduction of variation.
Stability and change together.
There's a perpetual tension between the mechanisms that enforce repetition and those that introduce the potential for change and innovation.
Okay, so if we have a better understanding of how repetition operates, are there practical ways we can use this knowledge to navigate our own lives and the complexities of society more effectively?
Absolutely. The first step is often to become more aware of the patterns of repetition in our own lives and in the systems around us.
Notice the loops.
Right. Particularly identifying those that might be maladaptive or no longer serving us well, things like harmful habits, ingrained cognitive biases, societal stagnation, or negative historical cycles that seem to keep repeating. At the individual level, this awareness can lead to strategies for conscious habit management. Cultivating mindfulness to interrupt automatic patterns of behavior, deliberately seeking out novelty and flexibility in our routines, actively working to counter our cognitive biases, and strategically utilizing positive routines to support our overall well-being.
Things we can do ourselves.
Yes. And at the societal level, it requires efforts to interrupt negative cycles through thoughtful policy changes that address root causes, designing positive feedback loops that can lead to beneficial outcomes, cultivating adaptive and learning-oriented cultures that encourage questioning and the thoughtful management of change.
Bigger picture stuff.
Promoting critical thinking and media literacy to help us evaluate information more effectively, and striving to align our human systems more harmoniously with the natural cycles of our planet for greater sustainability.
So it's about becoming more conscious of the patterns that shape us and consciously choosing which ones to reinforce and which ones we might need to disrupt in order to foster positive change.
Precisely. And when we consider the systemic effects, we see that systems that are overly rigid and resistant to change can be particularly vulnerable to disruptions. Even small variations within repetitive systems can sometimes trigger surprisingly large shifts in the overall behavior of the system.
The butterfly effect almost.
In a way, we also recognize that addressing large-scale societal problems often requires more than just individual-level interventions. Systemic changes are frequently necessary to break negative cycles. Conversely, We can consciously harness the power of repetition to create positive change by intentionally building beneficial habits and designing supportive routines at both individual and collective levels.
It takes effort on multiple fronts.
It often requires a multifaceted approach, working across individual, social, and systemic levels to create lasting impact.
This has been a truly deep and insightful dive into the pervasive principle of repetition. Let's quickly recap some of the key insights we've uncovered.
We've seen that repetition is not just a simple concept, but a fundamental and multifaceted principle that operates across all scales of reality, from the quantum realm to the vastness of the cosmos, and deeply influences everything from the formation of galaxies to the intricacies of human thought and culture.
It's everywhere.
Understanding its diverse forms and functions, from the precise replication of DNA to the recurring patterns of history to the cyclical rhythms of our own bodies, is absolutely crucial for gaining a deeper understanding of how the universe works and our place within it. We've explored how repetition provides stability and order, drives efficiency and skill mastery, underpins learning and memory, and even plays a key role in the emergence of complexity and novelty.
And it has some really profound implications for the field of artificial intelligence, which, as we discussed, learns and operates by identifying and leveraging patterns.
Indeed, the study of repetition is absolutely vital for advancing the capabilities of artificial intelligence, helping us to avoid potential pitfalls like overfitting and bias in AI models, enabling the creation of more accurate and sophisticated models of complex systems, and improving our understanding of the intricate ways in which AI interacts with human cognitive tendencies related to repetition.
Can AI help us with our own patterns?
It even prompts the intriguing question of whether future AI systems could potentially assist us in recognizing and managing our own repetitive patterns of thought and behavior.
So as we bring this exploration to a close, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
I would encourage you to reflect on the constant and intricate dance between sameness and change that permeates the universe and your own life. Understanding the many forms and crucial functions of repetition offers a much deeper appreciation for the fundamental mechanisms that shape the reality we experience.
Appreciating the patterns.
Exactly. It equips you to be more consciously aware of the delicate balance between the comfort and stability of the familiar and the vital need for novelty and adaptation in your own ongoing pursuit of knowledge, growth, and a more meaningful understanding of the world around you. Perhaps consider embracing the inherent cyclical nature of learning itself, the ongoing process of revisiting ideas, refining your understanding through repetition, and building upon the foundations of what you've learned before, always with an eye towards new perspectives and discoveries.
This is DigitView.